بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. MashaAllah, would you look at that? We're already at night 3. Alhamdulillah, 27 more to go, that's it. Inshallah ta'ala. Let's make the most of it, inshallah. It flies by. So today, at the beginning, Hafiz al-Nihal, he recited from Surah Al-Baqarah, which you will find one of the greatest verses in the Quran known as Ayatul Kursi, right? The verse of the throne. And in this Ayatul Kursi is both a dua and a protection and a reminder that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest and that we are the ones who are completely in need of Him. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. He is the most high, He is the most great. And then a couple passages later, Surah Al-Baqarah talks about one of the major sins that leads to a lot of turmoil on the last day. And that is the consumption of riba, the consumption of interest, the consumption of usury. And if we look at the modern banking system, unfortunately it has normalized riba to such a degree that it has made it a part and parcel of the economy. That you can't engage in the economy in any way without somehow engaging with riba. And so many of us, because of that, have become desensitized to riba, but we often forget that it is a major sin to consume it. And so as Muslims, we should never lose sight of the fact that just because something is widespread, that does not mean that it is good or moral in our society. And morality and good only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we do not want to lose sight of this fact that riba is a major sin and something that has not only major consequences in this life, but also in the next life. And so there are warnings in this juz about riba, and it makes it very clear in the Quran, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That those who do not, those who can engage in riba, those who do not turn away from interest, then it's as if you have just given permission to have a war with Allah and His Messenger. This is very strong wording. Very, very strong wording from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see that interest has destroyed the lives of millions. It has destroyed entire economies. It nourishes a corrupt system because it's designed to make the wealthy more wealthy, and it takes advantage of those who are poor and those who are desperate. And so when you take advantage of the poor to increase your own wealth, that's a very despicable act. It's a very immoral act. And it's one of the primary reasons why riba is such a major sin in Islam. So as believers, we have to try our best, although the economy has it all around us, our absolute best to try to stay away from it. This is the taqwa that we want to have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to also work to transform the system so that it is fairer to those who are poor. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came as a light to arguably the darkest society that this world has ever seen. And in 23 short years, he made it the greatest society this world has ever seen. We have that same light, we have that same guidance that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had during his time. He was one man that can do it. Even if nobody followed him, he would have still been able to do it. But alhamdulillah, he was followed by so many great companions that helped him in that effort. So it is a team, collective effort to pass and carry on the message of our beloved Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so then the Surah Al-Baqarah, it ends with another dua. And the closing verses are confirmation that we believe in the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us. That we believe in His prophets, His angels, His books, and then it's followed by a dua. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. Or even before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us and giving us hope that لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسَعَهَا. No soul will burden more than it can bear. So whatever difficulty you are going through, whatever situation you are in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you can bear it. And nobody can take that away from you. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. This is a beautiful dua because it helps us admit that we are weak. It helps us admit that we are forgetful. It helps us admit that we often slip up. But throughout that whole process, we constantly ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive and overlook those mistakes and to keep us firm upon His guidance. And then the next surah comes and we concluded Surah Al-Baqarah with that beautiful dua. And now we start Surah Al-Imran. It's in the beginning of It begins in the third juz of the Quran, so Surah Al-Imran does. And it continues also into the fourth juz, so we'll be reciting it for the rest of Tarawīh today and tomorrow as well. And it will be the focus of the next, because it will be a focus for our next 2 nights, inshaAllah ta'ala. Now, Bismillah. So a large portion of Surah Al-Imran was revealed in the 3rd year after Hijrah. And it reflects the specific political climate of that year in Medina. During the 3rd year after Hijrah, the Muslims started encountering Christian delegations that wanted to learn about Islam, and they wanted to learn about Isa alayhi salam and his mother Maryam alayhi salam. And they also had a lot of interactions with Jewish tribes in Medina as well. And most importantly, they also engaged in the Battle of Uhud. So with this surah, it gives us some insights into the challenges and the events that happened during that year. And so one of the beautiful things that Surah Al-Imran does is it addresses the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, more than any other surah in the Quran, due to the many interactions that Rasulullah ﷺ had with both the Jewish tribes and the Christian tribes during that year. Now, a beautiful link between Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran is that it continues on the topic of piety and guidance. Surah Al-Baqarah focuses on guidance towards piety, while Surah Al-Imran focuses on multiple examples of piety in the family of Imran and Zakaria alayhim salam. So there are multiple stories that are narrated to us. And so listen out for those stories in the next 4 rak'at that we are going to be reciting, because those stories are going to come up of Maryam alayhi salam, Zakaria alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam. And throughout those stories, you'll see many examples of piety, of guidance, of miracles, of prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and attitudes of these righteous people. Now the surah itself begins with a reminder about the core beliefs of Islam. And we are reminded that the Injil and the Torah, that are also books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, were revealed as a guidance from Allah to those who were before us. And so this is followed by the stories of who followed that guidance. And Allah begins the surah with a guidance or with a reminder. نزل عليك الكتاب بالحق مصدقا لما بين يديه وأنزل التوراة والإنجيل. That we have revealed to you the book of truth, confirming what came before it in the Torah and the Injil. And so this is followed by the verse that describes the verses of that are called muhkamat and mutashabihat, the clear and the ambiguous verses. منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. And so in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, the previous surah began with description of believers and disbelievers and hypocrites. And we see all 3 attitudes shown in those who believe in the unclear verses, and those who reject them, and those who seek to reinterpret them due to sickness in their hearts and hypocrisy. So what this verse, it's a very important verse in our aqidah. It's a very important verse in our Quranic framework and Islamic worldview. What this is talking about is that there are verses in the Quran that are clear cuts. You cannot reinterpret them, you cannot reject them, and there are verses in the Quran that either may be up for interpretation, or the verse is not clear what it actually means, and the meaning is only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to obsess over those is not of a Muslim. We want to focus on the clear, and we want to leave those that are ambiguous to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me give you an example. I'll give you a very simple example. The huruf al-muqatta'at. This is considered of the mutashabihat. So as Hafiz Ubayd recited just in the last rak'ah, alif lam mim. No scholar truly knows what that means. This is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to obsess over this verse is not becoming of a Muslim. Rather, we focus on the guidance of the Quran itself. And then this is immediately followed by a beautiful dua, asking for guidance. رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابُ. And so the good things of this world are a test, and our desire for them should not lead to the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ. So we must strive to keep things into perspective. Keep things into the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many worldly desires that are halal when we utilize them correctly, when we approach them correctly. But even with the halal desires, We want to make sure that we don't fall into obsession with them and only remember that these are worldly desires, and the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lead to a greater desire. And so through the stories of this surah, we are taught the beautiful manners, the beautiful beliefs and practices of Islam. And we also learn that Ibrahim alayhi salam was a Muslim and he preached Islam. ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. And then Surah Al Imran begins with very important reminders about the last day, such as يوم تجد كل نفس ما عملت من خير محضرا وما عملت من سوء تود لو أن بينها وبينه أمدا بعيدا ويحذركم الله نفسه والله رؤوف بالعباد. That watch out for the day that when every soul will be presented with whatever good it has done and whatever misdeeds were done. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns you about Himself, and Allah is ever gracious to His servants. So our belief in the Day of Judgment, on the last day, it also shapes how we perceive the worldly calamities and injustices that we see around the globe today. There are many injustices in this world that will never be resolved in this life. But knowing that there is a day that will come in which the oppressors cannot escape gives us hope. It gives us optimism even during our toughest trials. And then we learn that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to provide for whomever He wills without any limits. وَتَرْزُقُ مَن تَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And then in a couple verses later He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْزُقُ مَن يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Maryam alayhi salam as a response to Zakaria alayhi salam's question. And so the stories of Maryam alayhi salam and those around her, they form the central narrative of this juz. So to conclude, it is worth taking the time to read these stories ourselves at home, after Tarāwīh, tomorrow, and reflect on them. But especially while they're being recited today, think about how it looks to be someone of guidance, how piety looks in practice, and follow the examples of the pious predecessors before us. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.